After 68 days and despite international condemnation, Israel continues its total siege on the Gaza Strip. During the day, dozens of civilians were killed in Khan Yunis and Al-Daraj. In Peru, Pedro Castillo said that the former prosecutor Patricia Benavides made up a case against him and that after 8 months of investigation, he has not been able to provide any evidence. In the United Arab Emirates, 198 countries adopted the final declaration of COP28, agreeing for the first time to move forward with a transition away from the fossil fuel industry and to limit global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the TeleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. After 68 days and despite international condemnation, Israel continues its total siege on the Gaza Strip. During the day, dozens of civilians were killed after intense bombardments against homes in Khan Yunis and Al-Daraj cities. At least 20 Palestinians were slaughtered early Wednesday morning, including several children, after Israeli occupation aircraft fired missiles at residential neighborhoods in Khan Yunis, south of the besieged Gaza Strip. Home attacks were further reported in Al-Daraj town in Gaza City, bringing about 25 deaths. Palestinian Health Ministry updated that killings amounted to a death toll of up to 18,412 people, most of them children and women, while over 50,000 have been injured since October 7th. At the same time as the shelling of Gaza, the Israeli occupation army continued its aggression against the city of Jenin in the occupied West Bank for the second consecutive day. The Israeli army caused great destruction after bombing 3 houses in the eastern part of the town with Energa missiles. Several bulldozers accompanied the military incursion, destroying infrastructure. Furthermore, residents denounced that soldiers shot at all those who wandered the streets while launching a campaign of raids and arrests. The violent assaults on Tuesday left 7 Palestinians killed. Israeli media acknowledged on Tuesday that the number of Israeli soldiers killed since the ground offensive in Gaza rose to 115. According to the Israeli Defense Forces, on Tuesday, 10 soldiers of the occupation troops were killed and several were wounded after a series of explosions in the neighborhood of Sheyahaya in the city of Gaza. On the other hand, the Golani Brigade reported several wounded from Battalion 13 in Kasbah town. In this sense, Israeli Defense Forces point out that among deaths were Colonel Ischak Ben Basat, the highest-ranking officer killed in the ground operation, and Lieutenant Colonel Tomer Greenberg, a battalion commander. The World Health Organization (WHO) calls once again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza Strip and urged Israel to allow access to health centers in the territory. WHO's Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus denounced raids and incursions in the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Gaza. The authorities noted that the facility is besieged by the Israeli army, where about 65 patients in need of intensive care units and 45 medical personnel are tied down. Spokesperson Ghebreyesus pointed out that the hospital is under operation because of the Israeli blockades. WHO stressed that healthcare is protected by international law and that healthcare workers must be respected. Leaders of the Arab group, through a draft resolution, demanded the Israeli government an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. The Arab and Islamic nations convened an emergency session of the 193-member General Assembly where they voted for a resolution to put an end to the genocide in Gaza. The organization's spokesman Riyad Mansour stated that they would not rest until the occupying army complies with the demand. After the United States rejected the UN resolution for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, it has seen as the only entity capable of persuading Israel to end the bombing of Gaza. On Tuesday, a strike on a house in central Rafah killed at least 8 people and left 15 more injured, among them children. 3 of the dead were taken to the Kuwaiti hospital, while another 5 bodies were taken to the nearby Abu Yusuf al-Nayar hospital. Jihad Abu Romaneh, who lives next door to the destroyed home, described the immediate aftermath of the strike. He said that they heard a huge sound of an airstrike and was thus some destruction in the place. He also said that he pulled a girl from the rubble just before the ceiling collapsed. The conflict that began on October 7th after an attack of Hamas in southern Israel already brought unprecedented death and destruction to the impoverished coastal enclave, with much of northern Gaza obliterated, more than 18,000 Palestinians killed, and over 80% of the population of 2.3 million pushed from their homes.
Strike. It was dust, destruction here. I am their neighbor living beside them. I went out to see what was going on. I found one here was injured. You have here 8 houses that have been destroyed. There are 5 families in each house. At least it hit 40 families here. All our neighbors. Our beloved went in a second. What was their guilt? Our neighbors were injured. There was a little girl under the cement ceiling. It's God that wants her to live. The minute I pulled her out from under the ceiling, it collapsed right after. I arrived in a minute, as I am their neighbor, before the civil defense and the ambulance arrived.
Let's now take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back from the South. In Peru, Pedro Castillo said that the former prosecutor, Patricia Benavides, invented a terrorista case against him and that after 8 months of investigation, it has not been proven that he was involved. During a judiciary hearing, Castillo accused Benavides of being the leader of an alleged criminal organization and of supporting his imprisonment and his removal as president by ordering his detention while he was still president of the country and was enjoying of presidential immunity. On the other hand, Castillo's lawyer, Eduardo Pachas, pointed out that after a year in prison, the prosecutor's office has not been able to prove that there was an incriminating agreement between Castillo and other people. In this sense, Pedro Castillo pointed out that even his family has been strongly harassed by people who want to incriminate him.
I am more than a year unjustly detained, unjustly imprisoned. The people who have elected me, more than 9 million Peruvians, to represent them and lead them. However, a whole strategic plan in advance, in collusion, the leader of an alleged criminal organization has been supporting not only my imprisonment, but the one who also planned part of my vacancy. What more proof, Your Honor? What more proof we have? Here I have it at hand, and Peru should know it.
Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister Keith Rowley will travel to St. Vincent and the Grenadines to attend the meeting of the presidents of Guyana and Venezuela following the border dispute between the two countries. The meeting, scheduled for Thursday, December 14th, resulted from ongoing discussions and a decision adopted at the CARICOM emergency virtual meeting held on Friday, December 8th. In this regard, not only the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, but also the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, is scheduled to attend. The aim is to defuse tension through proper dialogue between the leaders of Venezuela and Guyana regarding the Guayana Esequiba territory. In Argentina, the ultra-right-wing government of Javier Milei approved a new economic package that includes significant social cuts, the elimination of energy and transportation subsidies, and the devaluation of the Argentine peso by more than 50%. The Minister of Economy, Luis Caputo, announced a series of 10 measures which include, among other things, cutting the number of ministries from 18 to 9, increasing the exchange rate to 800 Argentine pesos, and suspending all labor contracts entered into by the state with terms of less than 1 year. All this as part of the economic shock measures announced by Milei in his government's program. Minister Caputo admitted that the initiative will worsen the quality of life of Argentines for an undetermined period of time.
The state will not tender any more new public works and will cancel approved tenders whose development has not yet begun. As I said earlier, there is no money to pay for more public works that, as we all know, often end up in the pockets of politicians or businessmen on duty. For a few months, we will be worse off than before, particularly in terms of inflation.
In Cuba, the 44th edition of the new Latin American Film Festival continues, considered the greatest film event in downtown Havana. This edition of the festival aims to spread the work and thoughts of Cuban leader Fidel Castro through cinematographic and cultural material. During the day, 3 audiovisual productions were presented in his honor, such as Mexico-Cuba, A Fraternal History of Delicate Honesty, the animated feature film El Pillos Valdés vs. Dollars and Cannons, and the documentary Clarity, Until the Victory of Ideas. With the presence of outstanding interpreters such as Andy Montañez and Alida Millán, the last cinematographic proposal was shown on the occasion of the 65th anniversary of the founding of this pro-independence publishing house.
I believe that for Puerto Rico and for different parts of the world, Claridad is important because it denounces the cruelty and barbarities that these gringos commit against Puerto Rico, and Claridad is of utmost importance to defend our freedom and our way of thinking.
The history of Claridad had to be collected in some way, and this documentary does it. It is a tribute made by the grandchildren of Juan Mari Bras to the newspaper and to Mari Bras, and to the partner Juan Mari Bras, who is the founder of Claridad. And it is made for young people, so that young people know our history, know the history of the newspaper, and know the history of Puerto Rico, because Claridad reflects the struggles of Puerto Rico.
Relatives of the victims of the train tragedy demonstrating from the parliament in the town of Larissa in Greece. Demonstrations took place in Syntagma Square, where relatives and social organizations reiterated their demand that the causes of the accident that took the lives of 57 people, mostly university students, on February 28th be revealed. Demonstrators urged parliamentary officials not to cover up for those responsible for the incident. In this context, demonstrators denounced the negligence and delay of the corresponding authorities in providing justice to the families of the victims and clarifying the causes of the collision. In Spain, the plenary of Congress approved on Tuesday the consideration of the amnesty bill registered by the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party after its investiture agreements with the Catalan independentists. The initiative passed its first examination of support with 178 votes in favor of continuing the processing of the law. At the request of the Popular Party, the vote was public and carried out by call, so that all the deputies stood up to announce their vote loudly. Once the Congress has given the law the go-ahead to continue its parliamentary path, the Congressional Committee will open a first period for the presentation of amendments that may be used to modify specific points of the articles.
We are convinced that the amnesty law is necessary to put an end to the division of the last few years. It is needed to build a common project called Spain, in which we can all be more or less comfortable and find our place. It is political corruption, it is unjustifiable, it goes against coexistence, it is a democratic regression, it is contrary to the separation of powers, and it is a humiliation for the Spanish people.
We have a second short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience, you can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with TeleSUR. Final short break, don't go away. Welcome back from the South. In the United Arab Emirates, 198 countries adopted the final declaration of COP28, agreeing for the first time to move forward with a transition away from the fossil fuel industry and to limit global temperatures increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The declaration calls for deep, rapid, and sustained reductions of greenhouse gas emissions by 43% by 2030 and 60% by 2035 in relation to 2019, with the objective of reaching zero emissions by 2050. Environmental movements consider that the text shows, in addition, the mechanisms for financing the transition, a crucial point for Latin America and a good part of the Global South, were left out of the text. Detail of the approved text, it stipulates tripling global renewable energy capacity and doubling the annual rate of improvement in energy efficiency by 2030, accelerating efforts to reduce the use of coal-based energy without mitigation, and accelerating efforts towards zero net emission energy systems. Also moves away from fossil fuels in energy systems in a fair, orderly, and equitable manner, accelerate low or zero emission technologies, and substantially reduce non-CO2 greenhouse gas emissions, particularly methane emissions, by 2030. Finally, the reduction of emissions from road transport was highlighted with measures such as the deployment of infrastructure and low or zero emission vehicles and the gradual elimination of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies as soon as possible. In Australia, tropical cyclone Jasper has intensified to Category 2 and wind gusts of up to 140 km per hour are expected in the far north of Queensland. The cyclone is expected to reach land around 6 p.m. on Wednesday, although meteorologists say that hurricane force winds are already hitting some towns. In this sense, the Disaster Management Group of the tourist town of Cairns issued an emergency alert and advised residents to take shelter in the most resistant part of the buildings. Some 8,000 homes were without power, the Queensland state government revealed, while police personnel began to close roads in anticipation of flooding. In Panama, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development adopted new restrictions that force ships to use longer and more costly routes. The Panamanian Canal has cyclically suffered water supply problems with the arrival of the El Niño phenomenon, which could worsen the situation at the beginning of next year, 2024, for the World Trade Crossing. The administration of the Panama Canal highlighted that the number of ships that can transit each day will be limited to 32, from a maximum of 38, due to the reduction of the water depth. This implies that the ships must pass with little cargo to continue transiting continuously and reach their destination. On Wednesday, schools and roads were closed in China as a snowstorm hit parts of northern and central China for the second time this week. Over 100 stretches of highways and other roads, including railways, were closed in about half a dozen provinces. Snowfall began to fall late in the morning in Beijing, Chinese capital, where authorities took preventive measures, closing schools and other public spaces in outlying mountainous areas. Meteorological Administration of China forecasted an accumulation of 5 to 15 centimeters of snow for a strip of provinces south and west of Beijing. Also in China, authorities conducted assessments to determine the priorities and challenges of its economy for 2024. During the two-day annual Central Conference on Economic Work, China's leaders, led by President Xi Jinping, identified their main difficulties for the coming year, 2024, some of them related to the management of domestic policies and others to the serious and complex international scenario. Despite this, the Chinese leaders stressed that favorable conditions outweigh the negative factors, so the fundamental trend of economic recovery and the long-term positive outlook have not changed. However, they called for the introduction of more policies to stabilize expectations, growth, and employment. China and Vietnam boost relations with a community of shared future on President Xi Jinping's second day in Hanoi. On Wednesday, Xi held separate meetings with Vietnam's President Vo Van Thuong and Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh. The Chinese leader announced that both countries would work together to create a China-Vietnam community with a shared future of strategic importance. In this context, 36 cooperation agreements were signed in areas such as politics, security, practical cooperation, public support, and maritime issues. Xi's visit marks 15 years of China's becoming a comprehensive strategic partner of Vietnam. In Russia, the Russian Foreign Ministry authorities assured that the West failed in its attempt to isolate the country due to the good relations of President Vladimir Putin with world leaders. During his speech at the Federation Council, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov declared that Putin's good relations with his colleagues abroad proved that his policies based on the principles of the United Nations Charter enjoyed the widest support of the majority states of the world. The Russian Foreign Minister also pointed to the fact that Moscow has risen to 5th place in the world in terms of aggregate gross domestic product, overtaking Germany in spite of all the sanctions. Lavrov further stressed that Russia will continue to firmly defend its position despite the attempts of its enemies to eliminate the country as an independent geopolitical entity. Like this, we have come to the end of this news brief, but before saying goodbye, we want to thank our Caribbean audience, especially the audience of Trinidad and Tobago. We are pleased to share our newscasts and contribute to provide an alternative news source of the latest world events. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on our social media on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.